friend of mine who was studying at Boston Hebrew Teachers College saw a little flyer on a bulletin board there that a Reform rabbi in New York was looking for volunteers to go and live in Arab villages in Israel for 2 years to engage in community work and to try and build programs of cooperation between nearby Jewish and Arab communities. So this sounds perfect for me. They had an office in New York. It was a program called Interns for Peace. Rabbi Bruce Cohen. So I went into their office, which was on Fifth Avenue, not far from NYU, where I was studying. I got the information and came back the next day and signed up. And I became the first intern for peace. And I went into Interns for Peace, going to live in a village inside of Israel, Israeli Arab citizens, Palestinian citizens of Israel, knowing that the problem was not really the problem between Jewish and Arab citizens of Israel. The problem was the overriding Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or the Israeli-Arab conflict. But in 1976, I had gone with a small group of friends. We put together an organization just for a meeting that we called the Socialist Zionist Union. And we asked the PLO ambassador in New York if he would be willing to meet with us. And he agreed to meet with us after work hours behind closed doors. And we spent about 2 hours talking to the PLO ambassador in New York, trying to convince him to recognize the state of Israel and to agree to a two-state solution. And his response at that time was over my dead body. Now, I've set a rule for myself, which I've pretty much carried through with over all of these years, is that I don't enter into a dialogue in which I have to defend my right to exist. If I have to defend my right to exist, then it's not a dialogue. The dialogue begins where we're sitting at an even playing field at a table together, and the premise for dialogue is mutual recognition. So I said to myself after this meeting with Ambassador Terzi that the starting point for dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians hadn't yet arrived, but I was pretty convinced that it eventually would. In the meantime, I knew that at least I could make a contribution on trying to improve the relations between the Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel, knowing that there was a limit to how far that could go because of the overriding problem where there was a Palestinian-Israeli member of Knesset from Nazareth who in the 1960s had said that our problem of being Arabs in the state of Israel is that our state is at war with our people. So as long as they are suspect of being loyal to the enemy, there's a limit to how far their level of equality in the state of Israel can go. There's always animosity and suspicion toward them. And I knew that, but I thought that I would do this, and I thought that citizen-to-citizen program of working for democracy and civil rights was something I believed in. I was doing it in America in the civil rights movement, and I could do it in Israel. So first of all, in terms of answering my needs, after 3 months of living in the village, we had been connected to a kibbutz where we were on a training program before going to the village, and we had gone back to the kibbutz one day every month for meetings, and we would contribute to the kibbutz by working in the kibbutz half a day and then having meetings in the second half of the day. So after 3 months of living in this village, I'd gone back to the kibbutz. I was working in the kibbutz factory, which is a plastic factory. And during the coffee break, one of the old guys in the kibbutz asked me about their neighbors. I was living in the Arab village that was closest to this kibbutz. It was maybe 3 miles away from the kibbutz. So these were their neighbors that they'd been living to for their whole lives. And this old guy in the kibbutz asked me a question about his neighbors. And I started telling him about my experiences of living in the village in their neighborhood. And before I knew it, the whole factory was sitting around me listening to me. And they closed the factory for an hour and a half for a 20-minute coffee break to listen to me tell them about their neighbors. So I all of a sudden knew that I gained the credibility in 3 short months that I wanted to gain. All of a sudden they were interested in listening to me. And I discovered a lot of things that I was doing in the village. One of the things I discovered was that the question of Jewish-Arab relations in the state of Israel has to be the responsibility of the government of Israel, not voluntary organizations, not profit organizations. They have a role to play, but the government has to take responsibility. This is an issue of state. And every government in the history of Israel has said in its government bylaws that we strive toward equality between all of our citizens. It's never implemented, but it's there. And I also discovered that there was no employees of the state of Israel who were responsible for advancing relations between Jews and Arabs, citizens of the state of Israel. So I wrote up a proposal and gave it to the government of Israel and spent 14 months of lobbying, and I became the first civil servant in Israel responsible for Jewish-Arab relations. I was appointed by the Prime Minister's office, who was Menachem Begin at the time. I worked in the Ministry of Education, under the Minister of Education, who was from the National Religious Party, Zvulun Hammer. And I created the Institute for Education for Jewish-Arab Coexistence, and I created, or partnered in the creation of a department in the Ministry of Education for Democracy and Coexistence. And I did this all until the outbreak of the First Intifada. And when the First Intifada broke out, I understood that that place that I was looking for dialogue with Palestinians on the basis of mutual recognition had arrived. And that's how I got into this. But I wanted as a sentence. I think that I'm quite different than many other people who come into this kind of work because I come into it as a Zionist. And although it's difficult to define what that word means today, and so many horrible things are being done in the name of Zionism, I'm a Zionist, and I believe that the Zionist movement was not about the Israeli-Arab conflict. The Israeli-Arab conflict hijacked Zionism. Zionism was a noble movement of national liberation and a movement that strived to create a safe haven for Jews in this world and a place that would be an exemplary state based on prophetic visions, a light unto nations, light unto ourselves. And this is what I believe that Zionism is. So I come into this work as an Israeli by choice. I made Aliyah, I decided to live in Israel. I learned in Young Judea, in the youth movement, the Zionist movement that I was part of, that making Aliyah is not changing your address, but it's changing the essence of your life. And that's what I chose to do by moving to Israel. And for me, I approach this as a loyal Israeli. I want my state to be a good state. I want it to be a better place. So I have never defined myself as being anti-Israeli. I've always defined myself as being pro-Israeli. I'm also pro-Palestinian. Yeah.
The position that you held, does it continue? Because it seems the state of Arab-Jewish relations as citizens is pretty poor.
Yeah, the position did not continue, unfortunately. And the Department for Education for Democracy and Coexistence was hijacked by the National Religious Party when it came back into government after Shulemi Doloni had been Minister of Education from Meretz. They had changed it into the Department of Education for Values, and the values that they brought in were not exactly the values that we started teaching about. And when Yossi Sarid, who was the leader of Meretz, came back to the ministry and became the Minister of Education, the irony of it, the minister from the left-wing party closed the department that I had created many years before. So it doesn't exist anymore.
Are you doing lobbying to have it recreated?
No, I have a limit to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I haven't figured out a way to expand that time factor.